7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Just 6 hours after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the Philippines was attacked. An hour after they learned about Pearl Harbor, General Louis Bergen, who was chief of the Air Corps, called MacArthur to ask permission to bomb the Japanese harbor in Takao, Formosa. He was not granted permission. At 12:30 on December 8, 1941, Clark Field, Nichols Air Base, Iba Air Bases were bombed. More than half of the Air Force planes were decimated. On December 10, 2 Japanese landings made it north of Luzon in Apari and Vigan. Also on December 10, the naval capability was destroyed when they bombed Cavite, Sandwich Point in Cavite. In other words, the air capability and the naval capability was almost destroyed. On December 12, there was a huge landing south in Legazpi. This was south of Luzon. And this enabled them to block off the entrance from the Solomon Islands and from Hawaii, where the Americans were supposed to be going through. On December 22nd, General Wainwright's army met the Japanese in Lingayen and up north. But the Japanese were more equipped militarily in arms as well as in training. But the Philippine Scouts, they are the professional arm of the army. But what happened was, on December 22nd, General Homa's 14th Army landed in Lingayen, and the Japanese forces that landed south and north converged in the middle in Lingayen, and they were able to overpower the Philippine Army. However, unknown to the soldiers, President Roosevelt and Winston Churchill met in Arcadia, Washington, D.C., and agreed that aid would be going to Europe first. This despite promises, daily promises, to the troops in Bataan and Corregidor that help was on the way. On December 24, 1941, they switched back to War Plan Orange number 3. By that time, it was too late to relocate most of the resources, the food, gasoline, medicine, to Bataan. January 5, 1942, the men were already in half rations. By February 1942, there was no longer any quinine, and this was a mosquito-infested jungle, Bataan. Singapore fell after a week. In March, Indonesia fell almost immediately. March 12, 1942, General MacArthur and President Quezon left. The troops by then were in quarter rations. 500 men a day were getting sick of malaria. The fighting force it was only about 30% because most of the men were too sick or too hungry to fight. Seven-eighths of the main line of resistance, 7/8 of the main line of resistance was manned by the Filipinos. And so, on April 7, General Edward King, who was then in charge of the troops in Bataan, because General Wainwright had moved to Corregidor after General MacArthur left for Australia, he decided that there was no way that they could win. They only had 2 more days of food, and that's quarter rations. As I said, most of the men were either sick, they were sick, malaria, beriberi, dysentery. They didn't have enough food. The only food they could get was lugaw, which is porridge. There was no medication. And so General Edward King was forced to surrender to General Homa. And this is what he said. The ignominious decision to surrender is entirely mine, and I do not wish anyone else to be saddled with any part of the responsibility. I have not communicated with General Wainwright because I do not want him to be compelled to assume any part of the responsibility. I feel that further resistance would only be an unnecessary and useless waste of life. Our hospital is already filled to capacity and directly in the line of hostile approach and within range of enemy light artillery. We have no further means of organized resistance. If I do not surrender to the Japanese, Bataan will be known as the greatest slaughter in history. We were asked to lay down the bunt. We did just that. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Courage is a quality God has seen fit to dispense with utmost care. The men of Bataan were his chosen favorites. You must remember that at this point, there has been no air support, no naval support, and the men were left in Bataan and Corregidor to fend for themselves. Every day, there was a broadcast from the Voice of Freedom saying that help was on the way. But help never came, because we all knew that it was decided on December 22nd that no help was going to come. It was decided in Arcadia, in Washington, D.C., that all the United States efforts will go first to Europe, save Europe, and then Asia. So they were left to fend for themselves. And so what happened was on April 9th was the fall of Bataan, when General King was forced to surrender to General Homa. $75,000 troops surrendered to General Homa, consisting of 67,000 Filipinos and 13,000 Americans. Most of the men were sick, emaciated. The Japanese did not observe the Geneva Convention. Those who were too weak to go on were either beaten, shot, or bayoneted. Between 10 and 15,000 Filipino soldiers and about 750 Americans died during the march alone. Most of them were too sick to march. It was a 60-mile march. There were no provisions for transportation, except for 10 miles, but the total mileage was 60 miles in searing heat, no food, no medicine, no shelter. And on top of that, they were abused, beaten, as I said, shot, or decapitated. And worse, the civilians, those who tried to help, were also given the same treatment. More people died during the march than during the war. And more people died in Camp O'Donnell, where they were incarcerated. About 20,000 Filipinos and about 1,500 Americans died inside the camp. And as I said, they did not observe the Geneva Convention. A month after, on May 6, 2012, General Jonathan Wainwright was forced to surrender from Corregidor. At first, he wanted to surrender only the forces in Corregidor, but General Moma did not accept this. He wanted total surrender of the Philippines, of the United States to Japan. And General Wainwright was forced to surrender the entire Philippines, because the troops in Corregidor were held hostage. Because if they would not surrender, the troops in Corregidor would be slaughtered. And so that's what happened on May 6, 2012. And this is his speech. There is a limit of human endurance, and that limit has long since been passed. Without prospect of relief, I feel it is my duty to my country and to my gallant troops to end this useless effusion of blood and human sacrifice. With profound regret and continued pride in my gallant troops, I go to meet the Japanese commander. Goodbye, Mr. President. Now, the next number is actually a scene from the stage adaptation of the book. And as I said, it's about the emotional toll of war on a family. And today we're presenting a scene, it's called Back from Bataan. It's about a soldier, Pepito, who comes home with PTSD. And Pepito's sister, older sister, Angelina, is there to comfort him. So this will be performed by students Louis Paulo Amparado as Pepito and Noel Marcayo as his sister Angelina. So we didn't have any practice actually, but I'm sure it will convey to you what happened, how it affected this idealistic young boy from somebody who was quoting Emily Dickinson and who loved poetry to somebody who has seen death. So let's give a big hand to Louis